Welcome to our deep dive into the Imitation of Christ. Um, this book has been around for ages, and honestly, it's a little intimidating. Three whole books on, how to change yourself from the inside out, getting closer to Christ and finding inner peace. And then there's a whole other book on the Eucharist.
It is a classic, yeah.
I'm really curious what we'll find here.
And it makes you wonder what kind of wisdom it holds that it was written in the 15th century and people are still reading it today.
Yeah, for sure. So the first book kind of grabs you right away with this strong message about detaching from worldly stuff. There's this line that really hits you. Vanity of vanities and all is vanity besides loving God and serving him alone. Kind of makes you think, huh?
Yeah, it does. What I find really interesting about that is how it connects to the book's whole theme of finding true greatness through humility and simplicity.
Right.
Which is kind of the opposite of how the world sees success.
Yeah, it's like the book is saying all that stuff you're chasing after is not the real deal.
Mm.
But then it goes even deeper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it talks about battling all those internal enemies we all have, like pride and impatience.
Yeah.
I mean, the list goes on and on.
It's interesting how it talks about temptation. It doesn't pretend like you can just avoid it. It says it's just part of being human,
Yeah.
And instead of running from it, it says it's a chance to actually grow spiritually.
I like that.
Like refining gold in fire. It has to go through the heat to become pure.
Wow. That's a powerful image. I mean, what are the fires in our lives that are shaping us?
Right. Are they making us better or worse?
With a better or worse, exactly.
Yeah. The struggles we face, those times when we are tempted, they aren't just random obstacles. They could actually be chances to refine our character and make our faith stronger.
Okay, so we've talked about letting go of worldly things and facing those inner demons, but then book 3 goes in a slightly different direction. It focuses on finding peace by, aligning ourselves with God's will.
And that's where patience comes in. It's about trusting that there's a bigger plan, even when things feel uncertain or difficult.
Yeah.
It's kind of a change in perspective, isn't it? Instead of trying to control everything, we learn to just let go and surrender to something bigger than ourselves.
And that leads us to this interesting point about how the text views suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about being punished. It's about seeing those challenges as a way to become, more spiritually refined.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of a tough one to swallow. What do you think? Is there any truth to that idea, that our struggles can actually make us stronger?
I think what the text is getting at is a very real psychological truth, that we often grow the most when we face hard things.
Okay.
It's not about romanticizing suffering. It's about recognizing that in those difficult moments, there's a possibility for us to change in a deep way. It all comes down to how we decide to react to those challenges.
So it's not about just passively accepting whatever life throws at us. It's about trying to learn and grow from those experiences.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Ready for something a bit more personal? Let's get into book 4 and all its focus on the Eucharist.
Yeah, this section is really interesting because of the language it uses to describe the Eucharist. It's very descriptive.
Yeah.
It calls it the most sweet refection of the soul, a source of both comfort and grace.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it goes beyond just the ritual.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a real focus on the emotional and spiritual experience of taking communion.
Yeah.
It's like the text wants you to really connect with Christ personally through communion. Makes you wonder how people today experience and understand the Eucharist.
Right. And there's a big emphasis on reverence, preparation, and receiving the sacrament frequently. It's shown as a vital part of spiritual growth and connection with God. It's interesting how the imitation of Christ brings together the Eucharist and that search for comfort and connection with God. That whole idea of finding comfort and strength through communion, it pops up throughout the text.
It does seem like there's this theme throughout the whole book about simplifying our lives.
Yeah.
Not just getting rid of material things, but also simplifying our thoughts and emotions, Like there's a whole chapter in book 1 about being alone and quiet.
Oh, yeah. And that's where the book feels really relevant today. In this world that's constantly bombarding us with information and stimulation, it's almost countercultural to intentionally make space for silence and thinking.
Yeah, it's like hitting pause on the world so you can hear your own thoughts. And maybe even hear God speaking to us more clearly.
Exactly. It's like stepping away from all the noise and distractions so we can reconnect with ourselves and reconnect with something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, the book even suggests being careful about idle chatter and unnecessary socializing.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's encouraging us to be more mindful of how we spend our time and energy. even in our leisure activities.
Yeah, there's this emphasis on being intentional about what we let into our minds and hearts.
Right.
Like it suggests focusing on reading things that help us grow spiritually and not filling our minds with useless stuff. It's a message that really resonates in our time with so much information overload.
It's about making a lifestyle that actually supports our spiritual well-being, not just squeezing in prayer or reflection whenever we can.
Exactly. And you know, that idea of simplifying our lives, both inside and out, it seems to connect with the book's idea of detachment,
Right.
not just from possessions,
Right.
but from our own strong opinions and desires.
Like letting go of the need to be right all the time, surrendering our egos. That sounds really tough.
Yeah. It's definitely a challenging idea. The book talks about how important obedience and submission are, not just to God, but to people in authority in our lives.
Okay.
It's about realizing that our perspective isn't the only one or even the best one.
So then how do you balance that with standing up for what you believe in or
Hmm.
speaking truth to power? Where do we draw the line?
Well, that's where discernment comes in. The book says it's important to seek advice from wise and trustworthy people.
Right.
And most importantly, to pray for God's guidance to help us through those complicated situations.
It's like realizing that we don't have all the answers
Mm.
and we need to rely on something greater than ourselves to show us the way.
Absolutely. And sometimes the hardest thing to let go of is our own pride. The book talks about the danger of chasing praise and recognition. It says that true peace comes from a clear conscience and a good relationship with God,
Right.
not from wanting everyone to tell you how great you are.
It's like that quote, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not about becoming a doormat. It's about coming into situations with a different mindset, looking for God's will instead of our own.
That's a great way to put it. It's about realizing that there's a deeper wisdom working here, a plan bigger than what we can understand with our limited view.
It makes you think about all the times we try to force things to go our way, only to realize later that things turned out better when we just let go and trusted in something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And the book reminds us that we're not alone in this fight.
Yeah.
It talks about how important community is, supporting each other, and putting up with each other's weaknesses.
Yeah, it's about giving grace and understanding to others, just like we hope to receive it from God, and recognizing that even with our differences, we can learn and grow from each other. That's a beautiful picture of community.
Yeah.
But it also makes you think about how to balance that with what the book says about solitude.
Yeah.
How much time should we spend alone compared to time with other people?
Well, there's no one answer that fits everyone.
Yeah.
The book tells us to listen to our own hearts and to pray for God's help in finding that balance. Some people love being alone, others need more interaction to feel whole.
Yeah.
It's about being honest with ourselves, about what we need to grow spiritually.
So it's about being self-aware and discerning, not just following a bunch of rules.
Exactly. And speaking of learning from others, there's another important aspect of community that the book highlights.
Okay.
It's the examples of the saints. It encourages us to study their lives and find inspiration from their dedication and sacrifices.
Oh, yeah. It's like having this whole team of spiritual cheerleaders from the past encouraging us and showing us what's possible.
That's a great way to put it.
And what I find really encouraging is that the book doesn't make the saints seem like these perfect, unattainable people. It reminds us that they were human too, with their own struggles and weaknesses.
Yeah, and that makes their accomplishments even more inspiring.
Right.
It shows us that with God's grace, we can overcome our flaws and live really amazing lives full of virtue.
It's a reminder that we're all capable of great things no matter where we start.
Exactly. And the book also encourages us to be honest with ourselves about our own progress.
Okay.
Not comparing ourselves to others, but measuring our growth against who we were in the past.
So it's about focusing on personal growth and transformation, rather than getting caught up in competition or judging others.
Precisely. It's about recognizing how far we've come and continuing to strive for greater holiness without getting discouraged when we fall short. It's about progress, not perfection.
That's reassuring. I mean, we were all works in progress, right? So the book talks about the importance of making a strong resolution for spiritual growth. What does that actually look like?
Well, it's about being clear about how we want to grow spiritually and then actually committing to making it happen. The important thing is that those resolutions should come from God's grace, not just from willpower.
Okay, so it's not about white-knuckling our way to holiness, but about relying on something bigger than ourselves to guide and support us.
Exactly. And it's about being persistent, even when we don't see results right away. Spiritual growth is a long game, not a quick fix.
It's about having faith that God is working in us, even when we can't see it.
And it takes discipline and diligence. The book talks about being vigilant, watching over ourselves, not letting small problems become big ones.
So it's about being proactive in our spiritual growth, not just reacting to problems when they come up.
Right. It's about creating a lifestyle that supports our spiritual goals.
You know, this whole idea of being refined through trials makes me think about that analogy we talked about before, comparing our faith journey to gold being refined in a furnace.
Yeah, that's a powerful image.
hmm
It comes up a lot in the book. It reminds us that the tough times we go through, those moments when we're really tested, can actually purify us and make us stronger.
It's about seeing suffering not as something to run from, but as a chance for growth.
And it's not just about our own growth. The book also encourages us to think about the common good. It reminds us that we're all connected and that how we're doing individually is tied to how everyone else is doing.
So it's about making choices that are good for us and for society as a whole.
Exactly. It challenges us to live out our faith in a way that actually makes a difference in the world.
So it's not enough to just focus on our own personal relationship with God. We're also supposed to actively try to make the world a more just and compassionate place.
Exactly. And that means seeking wisdom from God, asking for guidance in our decisions, and trusting in his plan, even when it doesn't make sense to us.
It's about surrendering our limited human perspective to a higher power.
And sometimes that wisdom comes from unexpected places. The book talks about paying attention to even the smallest details and seemingly insignificant events in our lives. Being open to those little nudges from God, even in the everyday stuff.
So it's about cultivating this sense of wonder and attentiveness to the world around us, believing that God is speaking to us in all sorts of ways.
Exactly. And you know, The Imitation of Christ also has some powerful things to say about death.
Okay, this should be interesting.
Yeah, well, it encourages us to think about death not with fear, but with a sense of preparation and, dare I say, anticipation.
Okay.
It suggests that thinking about death can actually help us live more fully in the present moment.
So instead of being afraid of it,
Right.
we should use it to motivate us to live better.
It's about recognizing that life is precious and we shouldn't take it for granted.
It reminds me of that saying, live each day as if it were your last.
Yeah. But it goes beyond just seizing the day.
Right.
It's about living in a way that gets us ready for eternity.
So it's about making choices that are good for us and for society as a whole.
Exactly. It challenges us to live out our faith in a way that actually makes a difference in the world.
You know, it's really amazing how the imitation of Christ ties together all these different pieces of spiritual wisdom. We've talked about simplifying our lives and facing those internal battles, finding peace in God's will, and even thinking about death. But it seems like it all goes back to making our connection with God stronger.
It really does, yeah. And the book gives us so much practical advice on how to do that. One thing that stands out to me is how much it stresses turning to God for help when we're struggling. Admitting that we can't do it alone.
It's like acknowledging that we need God's grace, especially in those times when we feel overwhelmed or like we've failed.
Exactly. And the book encourages us to come to God with humility and truly sorry heart, realizing that we need his mercy and forgiveness.
It's about letting go of pride and trying to do everything ourselves, admitting we need help, and then asking for it.
And the best part is that God is always there to forgive us,
Yeah.
no matter how far we've gone astray. The book has this amazing message of hope and encouragement. It reminds us that even when we mess up, God's love for us never changes.
It's a powerful reminder, especially in a world that can feel so judgmental and unforgiving.
It really is. And it ties back to the book's focus on finding joy in serving God. It's not about gritting our teeth and just enduring hardship. It's about understanding that true happiness comes from aligning our will with God's will.
So it's about accepting God's plan for us even when it's tough or confusing.
Exactly. And it's about finding joy in the process, knowing that even our struggles can help us grow and change for the better.
As we finish up our deep dive into the imitation of Christ, what's the one big thing you want listeners to take away from this?
Well, I think the most important message is that the journey to spiritual growth and fulfillment isn't about becoming perfect.
Right.
It's about building a strong and lasting relationship with God, seeking his guidance in everything, and trusting in his love and mercy, especially when we make mistakes.
And don't forget, you can find some of the prayers from the Imitation of Christ in the show notes.
Yeah.
They're a great way to personally connect with the book and deepen your own spiritual practices.
Those prayers are a powerful way to actually apply the wisdom from the book and feel its transformative power for yourself.
Thanks for being with us on this deep dive into the imitation of Christ. We hope you found it insightful and encouraging. Until next time, may you find wisdom and solace on your own spiritual path.